Hello, everyone. My name is Meg Gotshall. I have been a software developer for over 2 decades. And back in 2021, I found myself in my first people management role. And as any new people manager, I had to learn a lot at the very beginning. How to give valuable feedback, how to protect my team against looming deadlines. But I also found myself in a bit of a somewhat unique situation, which is that half of my team was based in Ukraine, and the geopolitical situation was changing at the time. So, in addition to looming deadlines, we had a looming threat of the invasion. And when this started to get to the point where we actually felt that it was very likely to happen, I started looking around online to try to find resources for what was one supposed to do in this kind of situation. So I did some Google searches, and almost everything that I came up with related to how to manage a team during a war was all directed at kind of top level management and huge multinational organizations. So it was saying things like make sure that payroll isn't disrupted and organize extractions to move people and their families out of the country. And I was just a team lead. I have a half dozen people. I'm in another country. These were consultants, so I don't even have any access to their payroll information at all. So what could I do as a lowly team lead to help these people in this incredibly complicated situation? And luckily, I'm part of an international organization of online expat women. And I had a friend who had been based in Ethiopia when the civil war broke out there. And she reached out to me and gave me a couple of key pointers, and those ended up being incredibly useful because they gave me a really basic foundation for what we needed to do. And the very first thing probably goes without saying, but it was to reassure everyone on the team that they were the most important priority. Them, their families, they come before work no matter what. So yes, we have a big production deadline that's coming, but at the end of the day, that's not going to matter in that kind of situation. But also, I needed to stress that point to anyone outside of the team and say, we are going to need to adjust our deadlines. We're going to need to, build a little bit of slack in here because, yes, if everything goes to plan, we're going to deliver roughly around this period of time, but that could be seriously disrupted by what's going on. The other thing that she told me was to make sure that we talked about everyone's plans up front. So for we were having regular one-on-ones, so for each of the people who was in the country, in the weeks before the invasion, we sat down and we said, okay, what should the worst happen? What are you going to do? Are you going to stay where you're at? Are you going to move to a different part of the country? Will you be able to leave? So we kind of went through and I took notes and I had an idea of what everyone's plan was going to be. So then when the worst inevitably did happen, it turned out to be extremely useful because everything kind of just went onto autopilot. So I knew where everyone was going to go. I knew who was going to be able to potentially be in touch, who was going to be moving, so I might not hear from them for a few days. And not only that, but also I became kind of a hub of information. So other people who aren't on our team but who work with our team, people who just know the situation and are concerned, they all wanted to kind of know that everything was going to be okay, and they didn't know what was going on. So then I ended up being kind of the person who could tell all those other people, oh, well, they have an idea of what's going on. This person is going here. This person is going here. Basically reassuring everyone else who was concerned, but obviously didn't want to be disrupting them by saying, hey, what's going on with you? So after the initial invasion, we kind of settled back down into, okay, we're in our second phase of strangely new normal. But another piece of advice I had given was, be aware that there are going to be disruptions in network connectivity, in power. They're not going to be available all of the time. And there's a lot of things that we can do as developers working kind of offline. But obviously this kind of impacts how we meet and how we collaborate. So we kind of just had to set a different tone for everything, which was that be in meetings if you can, and if you can't, we'll figure out a way to work around it. So we'll do things asynchronously. We'll do a lot of things kind of offline or on Slack, or building shared documents, but not necessarily being able to schedule meetings, because we kept finding that, okay, we're going to have a design review and the whole team's going to get together and go through something, and inevitably something happens. Another thing was just to kind of, it became a really low barrier of entry of, I'm not going to be able to attend the stand-up today because I need to go to shelter. And so those were just little messages that got sent, and if they didn't get sent, we just assume the best and find out later. But it really kind of changed the way we had been working, because we were a really collaborative team. So we had to find a way to move those to more asynchronous models of communication. The other thing that I realized that I needed to do was to find an outlet. So when you're in a high pressure situation or a emotionally draining situation, it's important that you can stay and be that kind of solid, calm presence that you need to be, because other people are expecting it from you, which means that you need to be able to handle everything that's going on in your own way. So whether that's exercise, whether that's meeting up with a friend to vent, you need an outlet to be able to process everything yourself. The other thing that started to happen was that things are changing all the time. So everything happened all at once at the very beginning of the situation, but then things would start to move, and some things would happen in one part of the country and some things would happen in the other part of the country. And with everyone spread out, it was kind of hard to figure out who is being impacted by what. And as their day-to-day manager, it's my responsibility to kind of understand when these things are going to impact those people, when they're going to impact the team. And so I took it upon myself to start following the news and to make sure that I knew when something was happening in one of the areas that was going to impact us. Part of this, though, is being a responsible media consumer. So knowing the biases in the different news sources and following them on a regular basis will help you to understand. So having a couple of different sources that you can compare and contrast and see how they handle this situation differently. Understanding that bias is important, and also recognize that there is some sensationalism in the media. So just because media outlets are saying, oh, this is happening here, and this is happening here, and this has happened so many times in such and such a sequence of time, you have to remember that it doesn't necessarily impact everyone in that area. And there's a lot of, I wouldn't call it over-reporting, but kind of sensationalist reporting. So you need to also be able to pull kind of that aspect out of it and understand what the situation really is like for the people on the ground. Another key piece of this is that it's not your employee's responsibility to be your news source. So find ways to stay up to date that don't require you to have to ask them for information, because that is not their job. 2 years into this, we have kind of settled into a strange new sense of normal. We are actually able to work very similar to the ways that we did back during the pandemic. So everybody is remote in different locations. People are able to change locations as they have the need. Power generators and Starlink internet have pretty much solidified our connectivity, so we don't have the meeting problems anymore. But we're now starting to face a new set of challenges. And I think it's kind of similar. There are a lot of parallels to the time that we were all working during COVID. And one of those is that we're starting to see risks of burnout, because work can become a one sense of normalcy in this really, really chaotic situation. So when you can't go on the same kinds of vacations that you used to do, or you may not be able to go out as often as you did before, everything is different. But being able to work in the same way that you are used to working brings this one little sense of normalcy. And we've started to see that sometimes that gets carried a little bit too far. And people work too much because that is a safe, comfortable zone. One thing that comes from one person working too much, besides that person's risk of burnout, is also that if they generate too much code, that's going to be a lot of pull requests that everyone else has to then review. And you don't want everyone else to end up having their entire job being to review the pull request of the people who are working overtime. So what we've been doing there is to try to encourage people to do more training, to explore personal projects, and kind of to do work adjacent things, so that if work is what's giving them that kind of anchor in the storm, they can still do that, but in ways that are a little bit less disruptive. So I actually have been going back and forth for a year trying to decide whether or not I even wanted to submit this abstract. Part of that is because it's not, their story isn't my story to tell. So I didn't want to feel like I was capitalizing on something that happened to other people. But over time, I started to realize that even though their stories aren't my story, I have my own story. And I can tell my own story because I own my own story. And also, I thought back to those first days at the beginning of the invasion when I was looking for resources and I couldn't find any. And I sincerely hope that no one else finds themselves in this situation. But since war is a reality, I hope that this will serve as a resource to the people who come after me who might need it. So thank you for giving me the platform to share that.